Hi and welcome to another paint tutorial by Promethean Paints. Today we're going to go way back to 3rd edition Warhammer 40,000 and we're going to be painting one of the new Chaos Space Marine Terminators. I say new, they've been out for a few years, but they are still relatively new to me because I'm old and have played this game for a long time. So I was going through the sort of codex and I came across some really old school paint schemes that I used to love as a boy, and I decided I'm going to paint some models in these schemes. So flicked through the book, highlighted a few that I'm going to be doing, but the first one we're going to do are the Swords of Khargoth, which is a sort of red trim, black power armour, and then we're also going to do some cool effects on his mace that we've got. So what we're going to do is we're going to start off with the red trim, and we're going to be using AK matte red. If you're using Warhammer, that would be a sort of Mephiston red type colour, and all we're going to do is just all of your trim, which there's tons of when it comes to these Chaos Space Marines. Just give it a good coating as you would if you were doing them gold, whatever other colour. Just give them a base coat in this matte red. This is quite a thick paint, but it still required 2 coats in some areas. I've thinned it down slightly with some water, but not too much on the wet palette. So you probably will need 2 thin coats of this. Even with Mephiston red, you would need yourself 2 coats. So just work around the model and paint in anything that you would normally paint gold, like all of the trim. Just paint that red. Yeah, good luck. Right, once that is done, I'm going to grab some AK Dirty Red, which is a darker red, probably a corn red in GW colours, and I'm going to heavily thin it down to create a wash. So basically I'm going to be going, instead of using Nuln Oil, you could use Nuln Oil if you wanted to, but you'd have to then go back over the trim again with your base coats to bring back some of that colour. So I'm just going to be going over the areas I want to be a little bit darker with a darker red. In this case, yeah, it's Dirty Red from AK, but that would be Corn Red from Games Workshop. And all I'm going to be doing here is, so I've heavily thinned it down. There's probably 1 drop of paint to maybe 5 to 10 drops of water. So it's the same as you would be doing a sort of shade wash, and I'm just going to be working this over the model where I want it to be darker, so in all of the recesses around the little bumps, in the darkest shadows, just painting this red. I wanted the trim to be quite bright, so I've not made it too dark. You could, if you wanted to, go a shade darker as well. You could do a wash of, add a little bit of black to this, or a dark purple to create a sort of dark purple shade into the very corners and very edge recesses, but I wanted this to be a slightly brighter red, so I've only done it this level into the shadows. Remember when you're doing this to remember that where you pull your brush away is where you'll leave the most paint. So if you're painting a line going downwards, you'll leave most of the paint at the bottom corner where you pull your brush away. But the more you do this, the more you'll get used to it. And once that's dry, we're then just going to go straight on to our first edge highlight, which is an amazing colour from AK called Dead Red. It's a sort of very light, I'm not going to say pink red, it's just a bright red colour, really stands out. So this I'm doing as an edge highlight around all the areas, around all the edges, most of the edges, and picking out any of the points that I want to stand out. So that's around the skulls, around any spikes, the corners of the trim. So yeah, it's mostly an edge highlight, and just pick out any of those raised areas. You can follow along here. You notice I'm picking out the spikes, the tops of the skulls, the spikes on around the helmet area. So yeah, mostly an edge highlight, but also picking out any detail. This is the first highlight. We will be applying another highlight after this, and then a sort of a subtle glowing effect with some fluorescent paint. So we've had some fun with these. Okay, once you've done your edge highlighting, we're then just going to move on to some touch highlights here, some real bright points. I'm using this AK Ice Yellow, which is Dawn Yellow, for Warhammer, Games Workshop, and just a little bit of water I add to this just to thin it down, otherwise it can be a little bit too bright, a bit too thick and garish. And all I'm going to do this is apply it to the very tips, the topmost points of where I want it to be brightest, and this is almost a foundation for the little fluorescent paint we're going to be using over the top of it. So just, you don't have to do the fluorescent paint either, you can leave that off if you wanted to, but I just like to do it as it just makes the red pop a little bit. So just wherever you want to be the brightest points, so the tops of spikes, tops of the sort of shoulder pad trims, just imagine here, this is where the sunlight, in my case, is coming from his right shoulder down. So it's catching the right shoulder trim, the sort of left hand side of where around his helmet is top of his the top of his leg. So yeah, just mark those points. Just imagine the sunlight coming down, and just pick out those little points. Okay, once you've done that, then grab your Green Stuff World Fluorescent Red, give the bottle a good shake for that ball bearing to rattle, then you know it's shaken up, and just apply this over the ice yellow colour or the dawn yellow. Always apply this a little bit, just slightly like a contrast paint. Apply it over the top, and you'll get a nice subtle glowing effect over the red that sort of finishes off the armour quite nicely. So you've got some quite dark reds in the recesses and some bright red around the bright points. I think it's quite a nice quick way of painting the trim for these Chaos Terminators. I'm half tempted to start an army of this with this trim. I think it looks really good. It's really different. I've not seen it that often. Yeah, this stage is optional. You could just leave it with the ice yellow, but I think just covering it with the red just finishes it off nicely. Okay, now it's coming to the time to highlight the black armour. Always tricky highlighting black. I'm just going to do this quite simply, as I don't want to take away from the red trim. So first of all, I'm going to be doing the standard type of edge highlighting with a very dark bluish grey. In this case I'm using AK Anthracite. A little bit of water added to it so it flows off the brush nicely. I'm just going to edge highlight around all the areas that I want black, which is like his hands, the pipe work around the trim, around his armour, points of the armour, around his face, and obviously his the armour at the top, which contains his sort of head and shoulders area. Any pipe work as well you can highlight with this, around his gun, around the combi bolter. Just simple edge highlighting, a few little scratches here and there just to show there's a little bit of damage, a little bit of texture on the armour. And once we've done that, I'm then going to use an even lighter grey, which is AK grey blue, or it might be blue grey, slightly grey blue and blue grey, which is just a lighter grey, sort of an Ulthran grey from Games Workshop, just to do the final edge highlight on the very tippity tips that you want to be that brighter colour. with that done, we're going to move on to some metal work. As you can see, there's not much gold on these now. So the first one we're going to do is the silver work. So with this I'm using AK gunmetal. This is one of my most favourite metallics. Nice bluish grey, silver. Yeah, really lovely colour. Started to use this as my primary silver. There are loads of others out there. I mean, your standard, I think Ironbreaker is probably the closest to this, Games Workshop. Or you could just use your lead voucher. And I'm just going to be doing the barrels of the gun, the back parts of the gun, some trim around the gun. Obviously his spikes coming out of the top of his armour, the little part on his helmet, this sort of breathing point, and the bottom part of the mace. Yeah, not too much silver work here. I won't be highlighting it either. I don't think there's any real necessary to highlight these. I wanted the main effects to be coming from his armour and the mace. But if you did want to highlight the metal work, then you could just use the Stormhold Silver from Games Workshop, just do a standard edge highlight. The gold work, I'm just going to be using AK Rusty Gold and then AK Old Gold, which you would probably find would be Balthazar Gold and Retributor Armour as the highlight, and that's just going to be on the bullets, the bolts on his gun, on his spikes. We are going to be applying some rusty washes to those a little bit later on, so don't worry, they just look plain at the moment. We are going to be doing some washes on those later. leather. So he's got a little leather tunic. Some of the other Terminators have some leather work, mostly leather tunics, a bit of leather sometimes around the backs as well. For this, we're just going to use our standard approach, which is AK leather brown and AK saddle brown. So just base coat all of the leather in the leather brown, and then do about a 80% highlight using the saddle brown, leaving the leather brown in the darkest points, and the saddle brown is your main highlight colour. And then as a final highlight, we're going to grab some Citadel Acadian flesh tone, a little bit on the palette, and this is going to be sort of an edge highlight, so highlight the most raised areas, edge highlight around the edges and the edges of any holes, and add some scratches and marks just to give that leather a nice worn look. It's a lovely, easy to do leather recipe this. You could, if you wanted to, add another highlight on top of this I use Vampiric Flesh by AK. You would probably use Pallid Witch Flesh by Citadel, and you would just do that on the areas you want to be most worn, a couple of little scratches here and there, but for this, where it's a little bit hidden, the brightest will go is with okay, when that's done, he's got a little don't know what it is, a bit of hair or whatever coming from his belt, which I'm going to be painting with magenta and intense pink. So just base coat it in magenta. Once it's dry, do an edge highlight of the hair with intense pink. You'll find sometimes they have this hair coming from their helmets, or they're sort of, it's almost like a top knot. Some of these Terminators have. I know Abaddon has one. So yeah, just you can use whatever colours you like here. I'm just going with a nice pink, sort of a totally different colour, which is magenta and intense pink. But if you were going with blues, you would just go for a mid-tone blue with a light blue highlight. Okay, we're now just painting some details in now. So next up is he's got a Space Marine helmet on one of his spikes. So for that I'm going to do his Dark Angels, but very basic. I'm going to base coat the entire helmet with AK Black Green, which is Caliban Green from Citadel, and then give it a highlight, a simple edge highlight using AK Deep Green, which is almost Citadel Warpstone Green mixed with a little bit of Moot Green. But yeah, nothing clever on this, just undercoat it with dark green, highlight with a light green. during this stage as well, I'm also going to be painting the eyes, so the full eye gets a base coat of black green, and then the lens gets a coverage of the deep green. So just imagine the lightest part is the deep green, so that's the main lens, and the black green is the surrounding area. So just paint the whole of the eye with black green, and then pick out the lens in deep green, and then we're going to apply some fluorescent effects to that. So just using some AK Pure White, or any of your whites that you've got. I use AK Pure White to get good results with it all the time. Very gently put a dot of white on the sort of little light he's got in the top of his helmet, and then just gently pick out a little dot on the lenses, not too much, with the pure white, which will be the brightest point of the lens. Then grab some AK fluorescent green and just paint that over the white, so that will give you a nice glowing green eye on the miniature, and that's how we do our green eyes. Right, moving on to our next glowing effect. We're going to be painting the glow coming from his the vents on the back of his armour, and for that we're going to be using AK Wine Red, AK Blood Red, fluorescent, then some white, then some Green Stuff World Fluor REd, and finally some AK Fluorescent Orange. First step is to paint all of the vents with the wine red, complete coverage here, with the AK Wine Red. Once that's done, we'll move in on to Blood Red, and with the Blood Red, just paint in the middle section with this. So the Blood Red is the sort of starting point of where the glow is going to be coming from, so it gets brighter towards the hottest point. So this for me is always in the centre, so I apply a little bit of this into the centre, and then using our white I apply some dots in the middle of those areas. Then I go over it with the fluorescent red, and then I go over with small dabs of fluorescent orange in the brightest points. So you go from wine red to the blood red to a little bit of white, then fluorescent red, and then the orange, getting smaller and smaller as you do so, and you'll get a nice glowing effect coming from the back of his vent. Not too much of that orange, just little dabs, otherwise the effect will be lost. And once we've done that, we're actually going to travel back in time. The video ordering went a little bit out, so we're going to travel back in time, and we're going to paint the skulls and bones. And for this we've got 4 colours. So we've got AK Tenebrous Grey, AK Leather Brown, AK Mud Brown, and AK Light Earth. So, as you can see there, all in a little row. So with the Tenebrous Grey, which is a nice purplish grey, base coat all of your skulls and bones. Just cover the entire skull with the Tenebrous Grey. We will then apply our first highlight, pretty much covering 90% with the leather brown. So in Citadel colours, leather brown, you would probably use Steel Legion drab. Tenebrous Grey, there isn't really a Tenebrous Grey in Games Workshop, so you would start with a very, very dark brown. Almost probably you'd start with Rhinox Hide if you were using Citadel colours. So yeah, but for us we're using Tenebrous Grey. So yeah, then you would do Tenebrous Grey, across all of the bone areas, including the bones on the front of his helmet there. Then your first highlight, which is sort of a secondary base coat, is with leather brown, sort of leaving the Tenebrous Grey in all of the deeper recesses. Then you would use mud brown to do a highlight, so on the areas, the tops of the skull, around, sort of edge highlighting the eyes, the nose, the teeth, any points of the skull you want bright. And then your final highlight is with light earth, where you would do your final edge highlighting, little dots and scratches on your skulls where you want them to be at the brightest points. And they're the 4 colours that I use. Like I was saying, for Citadel you would probably use Rhinox hide, Steel Legion drab, Zandri dust, and then use Shabti bone if you were using Citadel, possibly Screaming Skull instead of your Shabti bone if you wanted to go very bright. I find that those 4 colours, even the Citadel colours, give a great effect for your skulls, give them a very dusty, dirty look. And especially if you apply some washes over them a bit later, like we're going to do, really makes them stand out. Okay, there's one final sort of piece on the model to do, and that is our mace. So what I'm going to do here is, in that pot of paint is a white ink wash. So the wash is made up of, it's 1 part ink, 3 parts water, 1 part contrast medium, and all I did was made a massive pot of it and put it into a contrast medium pot. And what that does is it creates a whitewash which flows into all of the recesses really easily. And all I'm doing around the mace is now, quite crudely, we're going to be using the airbrush in a minute, is picking out all of the areas that I want to glow as the brightest. We're going to be applying some contrast paint over this, so the white areas are your brightest. So what I'm just doing is that the ink flows in nicely, and once it's dried, leaves a nice pure white line in the deepest parts, with a little bit of sort of white around the edges. So for this, it's all the central points of the mace, around the base of the mace, around the top of the mace, and a little bit in any vent holes or energy, where you can see the energy coming from. That's where I've painted white. I'm also putting some of this inside the skulls, so we'll be painting those green in a minute. So the skulls on there, front and back, the skulls around his shoulder pads, we'll be applying some fluorescent green to those. With this white ink wash, it does take some time to dry. I'd leave it a good 5 to 10 minutes for it to fully dry, otherwise you'll apply the airbrush and it'll just splash absolutely everywhere. Yeah, so once that's dry, we're now using the airbrush. We're going to put some white ink through the airbrush, and just to show you there, I'm not using an expensive airbrush here. That's a £30 airbrush that I got off Amazon. So with the airbrush, I'm now pointing the nozzle towards the centre, to where it was brightest, so that I get a natural haloing gradient from the centre to the outside. So it goes from bright to dark. Very simple to do. The ink does clog up the needle, so you have to just keep it. You might apply just a little bit of airbrush thinner, not too much to the white ink, otherwise it pours out. But yeah, just aim the nozzle into the centre and let the airbrush do what it naturally does in creating gradients, by focusing into the centre where the brightest is and letting the gradient naturally come out from the airbrush. Just a couple of passes. If you see the ink start to pool or glisten, move it away, because that's when it's wet. Applying any more will make it run and spider. Just take your time. If you don't feel confident, you can cover the model up, or remove the arm altogether. And then I want a little bit of the blue glow on his arm, so I'm just spraying a little bit onto the top of his arms and hand. Obviously don't spray this white where the light wouldn't catch it, so don't spray it underneath the arm on the opposite side. Just think where the light is going and only spray your ink in that area. And then once that's done, go give your airbrush a good clean out, and then grab your the Citadel contrast Aethermatic blue, put it straight into your airbrush, no watering this down, and very carefully apply this over all the areas you've just painted white. Don't matter about covering some of the black as well, it'll just tint that area blue. A few sprays. Once it comes out very thin, so just move the airbrush around. Don't focus on one area, just keep moving the airbrush around, otherwise it will pool and run and it'll look horrible. A little practice is needed to do this, but yeah, contrast paints through the airbrush is a good tool to have in the arsenal, especially here, because within a few easy steps you've got yourself a very good looking power weapon that we can apply just a few more highlights to. Okay, once that's done, grab some AK Sky Blue, some white, and the fluorescent green again. We'll come into that in a minute. And with the AK Sky Blue, I'm going to be doing some line work here. So I edge highlight the mace, and I pick out the points I want to be the brightest. And so this is the edges of the mace, this is the centre points of the power nodes, and then I also add very, very carefully, with small amounts of paint on the brush, I'm just going to go around and add some little like lightning, as it were, little scratches of that sky blue to make it look like there's power crackling from the central point of the mace. You don't have to do that here, but do ensure that you use the sky blue to just pick out the points you want to be brightest. So I've done that. If we ignore the power node, it's this back in the central points of the power mace itself. Yeah, and just anywhere where you want it to glow. And then I also did it around the top of the hand and the arm, just to show that area is glowing the most. Notice there I picked out some areas in white, and now I'm just going to make a little mix 50-50 of the sky blue and fluorescent green, So the areas I've just picked out in white, I'm just going to pick out in that little mix of colour, and it just makes them pop a little bit more, gives a little bit of colour variation to the mace, bluish greenish effect, very subtle, but I kind of like the effect. And then the green skulls, I will just go back in on the green skulls, on the skulls, the areas we painted white earlier on the skulls, on his shoulder pads and around his waist, just fill the eyes in with the fluorescent green. And there he is, all done. Last part is what I do for the base, which is optional. Obviously, you can base him how you would like, but I'm just going to give you some short tips and hints of what I do. So I've got that water-soluble rust. It's a great bit of kit, a bit stinky, a bit weird to use. So all I've done is I've based the model. Got a load of basing material off eBay, so like crushed brick rubble, some resin skulls, put it into a big tub and shook it all up, and then super glue the base and apply, just dip that in so it gets covered. It's all it's basically just rubble crushed down. So the water soluble rust works off of water, so you apply it to the model, to the area, and then the more water you add, the more diluted it becomes. So if you don't add very much water, it will be very, very rusty. So it sort of dilutes with the more. So I didn't want it to be too rusty effect. I wanted to sort of mid-tone on it, but it takes a little bit of practice to use that stuff, and I'll be doing a few more videos on it. It does take quite a while to dry, about half an hour. If you think you've watered it down too much, like I think I did there, I just applied some in the areas where I wanted it to be really rusty, dirty, but it gives a very good pigment effect without having to use dry pigments and go through the faff of drying them down. So yeah, once it's dried, I applied the miniature back to it, and then I just made a wash using AK light rust, but you could use any light orange colour from Citadel. Scrag brown is also really good, and with just the wash I go around and just apply this over areas where I want it to be rusty dirty, which is around the skulls and the spikes, the base of his shoes and armour, just where the dust and rust would have collected. Very simple basing techniques and weathering techniques, but they give a great effect very, very quickly. On lighter models or on black armour, you can use the Citadel Mournfang Brown as your first weathering colour. So make a wash of that and apply it around the areas you want weathered, and then once dry, apply the light rust colour over the top, so you get a nice tonal dust effect doing that. I might be doing some videos a bit later on some other basing techniques, but there you can see very quickly we've got a nice battle worn base with some weathering. And then once that is dry, I then give it a dry brush using the AK Light Earth, which is probably use Shabty Bone in Games Workshop Citadel World. Very light dry brush, just catching the very top edges. I didn't want to do too much on this. I didn't want it to ruin the effect. And then paint the base in any black, and that's him, that's all done. So I hope you've enjoyed this slightly different one here for a Chaos Terminator, not in your traditional black and gold. So today, we learned how to paint the swords of Khargoth. There'll be a few more in this series, just to give some differing ideas on how to paint your Chaos Space Marines. As always, I hope you really liked this tutorial. Any feedback you've got, good or bad, I can only learn from you guys on what you like to see. Just add comments, of course, like and subscribe. It's really appreciated you watching these videos. And as always, happy painting.